They say power is a ladder, a climb from the mud to the stars. They are wrong. In the 41st millennium, power is a circle, a loop of suffering that begins in blood and ends in damnation. We believed we knew the shape of our enemy. We catalogued the daemons of Khorne, the schemers of Tzeentch, but we ignored the ancient warnings of a shadow that grew before the Emperor first drew breath. It was not a weapon of mass destruction that brought the sector to its knees. It was not a titan nor a virus bomb. It was a trinket, a band of unblemished gold, forged in the fires of the warp, inscribed with a language that burns the eyes of any who dare read it. It has been found, and in the silence of the void, the Imperium is screaming, one ring to rule them all, and in the grim darkness of the far future, it does not wish to be found, it wishes to be fed. The wind upon the dead world of Antian IV did not howl, it shrieked, a discordant choir of radioactive isotopes grinding against the ceramite plating of Magos Explorator VXI. Through the murky red visuals of his optical sensors, the landscape was a graveyard of geology, vast dunes of gray dust obscuring the horizon where the bruised purple bruise of the Cicatrix maledictum stained the void. VXI adjusted his gait, his mechadendrites twitching autonomously to stabilize his heavy frame against the gale. Behind him, a maniple of Skitarii Rangers marched in perfect, synchronized silence, their galvanic rifles held tight to their chests, their cloaks flapping like the wings of carrion birds. The data tethers in the Magos' mind were silent, save for the rhythmic clicking of the Geiger counters, a metronome counting down to their inevitable radiation saturation. They were searching for a signal that had ghosted across the sector's Auspex arrays, a signature that defied the binary laws of the cult Mechanicus. It was not a machine spirit, it was a void in the data, a null point of such absolute stillness that it terrified the logic engines of the Explorator fleet. Cogitator subroutine, fear, VXI transmitted to his own internal drive, promptly deleting the emotion file. Proceed. The Omnisia knows all, comprehends all. The ruins emerged from the ash storm not as buildings, but as jagged wounds in the crust of the planet. They were not Imperial Gothic, nor were they the sleek bone-singing of the Eldari or the crude brutalism of the Orcs. The architecture was non-Euclidean, angles that hurt the biological remnants of VXI's brain to perceive. Stone pillars twisted like solidified smoke, leading down into a gaping maw of black plasteel, a vault door that had remained sealed since before the Emperor united Terra. As the excavation team deployed their melta cutters, the air grew heavy, tasting of ozone and ancient copper. The door did not yield to heat. Instead, as VXI approached, the archaic locking mechanism groaned, a sound like a dying beast, and the massive slab slid open of its own accord. A draft of stagnant air, preserved for 30 millennia, rushed out to meet them. It carried no scent of decay, only a profound, unnatural cold that caused the heat sinks on the Skitari's power packs to frost over instantly. The darkness inside was absolute, swallowing the lumens of the explorers as if the light itself was being eaten. They descended into the crypt, the click-clack of metallic feet echoing into the void. At the center of a circular chamber, suspended on a plinth of obsidian that seemed to drink the light from the VXI shoulder-mounted floodlights, sat the object. It was small, insignificant, a simple band of gold, unadorned by gems or circuitry, resting in the center of the dark stone. Yet on VXI's Auspex, the object was screaming. The thermal readings were contradictory. The ring registered as absolute zero, completely devoid of thermal energy, yet the air shimmering around it was blistering hot, warping the visual feed. Classify, VXI commanded the Skitarii unit, his voice a synthesized grind of static. Unknown alloy, came the Benheric canticle from Skitarii Ranger 7 Theta. No logical origin, no STC match. It is beautiful. The final word was an error. Skitarii did not perceive beauty. VXI pivoted his optical array to the Ranger, detecting a spike in the soldier's dopamine receptors, a biological flaw that should have been scrubbed during indoctrination. The ring seemed to pulse in the gloom, a heartbeat of golden light that synchronized with the thumping of VXI's own remaining organic heart. Do not engage physical contact, deploy stasis claw, VXI ordered, but his command signal was overridden by a surge of static interference. Ranger 7 Theta stepped forward, his movements jerky, fighting the protocols inscribed in his neural cortex. The Ranger's hand, a mix of cybernetic servos and pale flesh, reached out toward the golden band. "My data," the Ranger whispered, his vocalizer glitching into a rasp that sounded terrifyingly human. The moment his gloved fingertip brushed the cool metal of the ring, the silence of the vault was shattered. There was no explosion, no shockwave. Instead, Ranger 7 Theta simply ignited. It was not fire, but a golden immolation, a holy and terrible flame that consumed metal, flesh, and soul in a single microsecond. The Skitarii did not scream in pain, he screamed in ecstasy, his binary canticles dissolving into a shrieking code of unknown syntax before he crumbled into a pile of ash that smelled of sulfur and burnt sugar. The ring remained on the plinth, cool and mocking. Magos VXI stared at the pile of ash, his logic gates frantically attempting to process the casualty. Illogical, impossible, heretical. He stepped forward, his servo arm extending a delicate, consecrated pair of forceps. He should destroy it. He should call for an orbitant bombardment and purge this vault from history. That was the logical conclusion. That was the imperial truth. But as the forceps clamped around the ring, lifting it into the light, VXI felt a sudden overriding directive rewrite his core programming. The text inscribed on the inside of the band flared to life, glowing like magma, letters from a language that made his optical sensors bleed static. One ring to find them. The translation matrix failed. He placed the artifact into a lead-lined containment box, sealing it with the sign of the cog. He turned to the remaining Skitarii, who were trembling, an action their physiology should not permit. "Secure the perimeter," VXI said, his voice dropping an octave, hoarding the silence. "This discovery is classified. It is necessary for the quest for knowledge." He lied. He did not care for knowledge. He simply wanted to hold the box again. It was his logic, his precious. Inquisitor Lord Kaelen of the Ordo Malleus stood upon the command dais of the black ship Saint's Mercy, a solitary statue of adamantium and faith amidst the frenetic activity of the bridge crew. Before him, the main oculus screen displayed the drifting hulk of the Adeptus Mechanicus transport, Logic's Edge. It was dead in the water, venting coolant into the void like the blood of a wounded leviathan. Kaelen's gloved hand rested on the pommel of his force sword, Daemon Bane, the leather creaking in the silence. He felt it before the sensors reported it, a psychic pressure, a headache that tasted of copper and old dust pressing against the back of his eyes. "No response to Vox hails, Lord," the shipmaster reported, his voice trembling slightly. "Thermal scans indicate life support is failing, but there is a singular heat source in the primary cargo bay. It defies calibration." Kaelen narrowed his eyes. He had hunted daemon hosts in the slums of Hive Tenebra and banished bloodthirsters on the burning plains of Armageddon, but this felt different. It was not the chaotic roaring of the warp. It was a seductive, insidious silence. "Prepare the boarding torpedoes," Kaelen commanded, his voice grinding like tectonic plates, "and wake the sanctioned psyker. We walk into the mouth of the beast." The interior of the Logic's Edge was a tomb. Gravity plating had failed, leaving globules of promethium and frozen blood floating in the zero-G corridors. Kaelen moved with magnetic purpose, his boots clanging against the deck as his retinue fanned out behind him. 3 stormtroopers with hell guns, and Malachi, a sanctioned psyker whose eyes were sewn shut, reliant on the witch sight to see. They found Magos VXI in the main vault. The tech priest was not conducting repairs or rites of maintenance. He was huddled in the corner of the room, his mechadendrites wrapped protectively around a small, lead-lined casket. The Magos was murmuring, a stream of binary that sounded like a child weeping. "Mine," the Magos hissed, as Kaelen's lumen beam cut through the darkness. "My data, my precious logic." The corruption was evident not in flesh, but in behavior. A creature of pure logic had succumbed to the most human of failings, avarice. "Hand over the artifact, Magos," Kaelen ordered, leveling his bolt pistol. VXI shrieked, a sound of digital static, and lunged. Kaelen didn't hesitate. A single mass-reactive round took the Magos in the shoulder, spinning him away. The box clattered to the floor, sliding across the deck plates. Back aboard the Saint's Mercy, the artifact was placed within the Hex Chamber, a room lined with silver and inscribed with the 666 banishment rites of the Grey Knights. Kaelen stood over the lead box. Even through the shielding, he could feel it. It was a gravitational pull on his soul, a whisper promising him the power to purify the galaxy, to end the threats of Xenos and heretic alike with a single command. "Just a peek," the voice whispered, "just to see the tool of your victory." Kaelen recited the litany of iron will, sweating beneath his armor, and unlatched the lid. The stasis field hummed to life, suspending the gold ring in a column of blue light. It looked harmless, mundane even, yet the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch toward it. "Analyze it, Malachi," Kaelen said, stepping back, his hand never leaving his sword. "But do not touch it with your mind. Skim the surface only." Malachi, the psyker, stepped forward, his sewn-shut eyes twitching violently behind the scar tissue. He raised a trembling hand, the crystals on his psychic hood glowing with a pale, sick light. "It is old, Lord," rasped Malachi, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on stone. "Older than the Imperium, older than the Crusade." The air in the chamber dropped 20 degrees. Frost crystallized on the purity seals pinned to the walls. As Malachi focused, the ring reacted. The gold band heated instantly, turning a fiery orange. Script began to bleed through the metal, letters of fire that burned the air. Ash Naz Durbatuluk. The language was not chaos, not strictly. It was the black speech of a realm lost to time, translated through the madness of the warp. Malachi gasped, his back arching unnaturally. "I see him, the great eye. It sees me. It sees us all." Disaster struck with the speed of a thought. The psychic dampers on Malachi's hood shattered, exploding in a shower of sparks and crystal shards. The psyker was lifted off the ground by an invisible throat hold, his limbs thrashing. The ring was humming now, a low thrumming vibration that cracked the reinforced glass of the viewing ports. "Close the box," Kaelen roared, lunging forward, but the air pressure threw him back. A rift was tearing open in the space where Malachi's head used to be, a pinprick of pure Empyrean energy. The psyker did not just die, he was hollowed out, his soul serving as the kindling for a beacon. From the rift in reality, a sound emerged, not a roar, but a screech, like metal on metal, the cry of a Nazgûl amplified by the energies of the Imperium. Kaelen, fighting the gale force wind of the rift, managed to slam the lead lid of the box shut. The connection severed, the rift snapped closed with a thunderclap that threw the Inquisitor against the bulkhead. Silence returned, heavy and smelling of ozone and wet meat. Malachi's headless body slumped to the floor. The box sat there, innocent, silent, waiting. The transition into the Imperium was usually a sensation akin to falling through ice-cold water, a momentary shock to the soul before the Geller field stabilized reality. But this time, for the crew of the Saint's Mercy, it felt like drowning in boiling oil. Voidmaster Harlan gripped the brass railing of the command pulpit, his knuckles white, as the black ship tore through the veil between real space and the warp. The reality engine screamed, a mechanical torture that vibrated through the deck plates and into the teeth of every crewman. Outside the reinforced Oculus shutters, the warp was not merely a churning storm of colors, it was a focused, malevolent heavy weather. A storm of sickly green and bruised purple swirled around the ship, but unlike standard turbulence, this storm had an eye, and the eye was watching them. Geller field integrity at 80% and fluctuating, the tech priest monitor droned, though the fear in his synthesized voice was palpable. We have guests. Auspex detects 9 distinct energy signatures surfing the wake of the ship. They are matching our velocity. Throne, they are breaching the field. Deep in the bowels of the ship, the air temperature plummeted. It was not the cold of the void, but the chill of the grave, a damp, rot-filled cold that made the breath of the naval armsman mist in the air. Sergeant Kroll checked his combat shotgun, the pump action racking with a reassuring clack-clack. "Hold the line," he bellowed to his squad stationed outside the hex chamber. The corridor lights flickered and died, replaced by the emergency crimson strobes that bathed the hallway in the color of fresh blood. The shadows at the far end of the corridor began to detach themselves from the bulkheads. They did not walk, they glided, feet hovering inches above the grating. There were 9 of them, tall, draped in tattered robes of void black that seemed to absorb the red light. Beneath the hoods, there were no faces, only a void of infinite depth, and the faint, terrible glint of iron crowns. They carried longswords of jagged dark metal that wept black smoke, warp-forged blades that existed in both the material and immaterial realms simultaneously. "Open fire!" Kroll screamed. The corridor erupted in a deafening roar of shotgun blasts and laze fire. The armsmen were veterans of boarding actions, disciplined and lethal, but the lead shot and laze beams passed through the advancing figures as if they were smoke. The projectile struck the far walls, sparking harmlessly, while the 9 continued their silent advance. The lead wraith raised its blade, and a wave of psychic terror, the black breath, washed over the defenders. Men dropped their weapons, clutching their chests as their hearts seized in sheer primal panic. One armsman clawed at his eyes, screaming about a wheel of fire. The wraiths moved with terrifying speed now, a blur of motion. The first blade swung, not cutting through armor, but phasing through it to sever the soul from the body. Kroll watched his corporal fall, the man's face frozen in a rictus of gray death, his skin instantly necrotic. The shadows were not here to fight, they were here to harvest, and they were sniffing the air, hunting the scent of the gold. Inquisitor Kaelen burst onto the deck, Demonbane igniting with a crackle of psychic lightning. He saw the slaughter, 20 good men dead in seconds, their bodies gray and shriveled. "Back to the warp spawn," Kaelen roared, charging the lead wraith. He swung his foresword in a decapitating arc. Unlike the mundane weapons, the psychic blade connected, biting into the essence of the entity. The wraith let out a shriek that shattered the lumen globes overhead, a sound high and thin, like a needle being driven into the eardrum. The creature recoiled, its robe smoking where the consecrated blade had struck, but it did not fall. It laughed, a hollow grating sound that echoed inside Kaelen's skull. "Give it to us," the voices whispered, not from the creatures but from the walls, from the floor, from the blood of the dead. "The Great Eye commands it!" Kaelen realized with a jolt of horror that these were not standard demons, they were tethered to the ring. As long as the ring existed, they could not be banished, only delayed. The ship lurched violently, throwing Kaelen against the bulkhead. The ring in the vault behind him was humming, a resonance frequency that was tearing the Saint's Mercy apart from the inside. The Geller field generator began to howl, the final death rattle before total collapse. If the field failed completely, the ship would be flooded with the raw warp, and they would all be eternal playthings of the dark gods. "Bridge!" Kaelen screamed into his vox bead, parrying a blow from a Morgul blade that numbed his entire arm. "Emergency translation! Get us out of the warp! Now! Anywhere!" As he gave the order, the 9 pressed forward, sensing their proximity of their prize. The ship's engines fired an emergency burn, tearing a hole in reality to escape back to real space. The transition was brutal, a sheer drop from the heavens to the earth. The 9 wraiths, tethered to the warp, shrieked in frustration as the laws of physics reasserted themselves, their forms stretching and dissolving into mist as the Saint's Mercy was spat out of the Imperium, hurtling uncontrolled toward the gravity well of a massive industrial world below. Consciousness returned to Inquisitor Kaelen not as a waking, but as a violent resurfacing from a sea of pain. The air tasted of ash, copper, and the distinct oily sweetness of leaking promethium. He lay amidst the twisted ruin of the Saint's Mercy's starboard escape shuttle, which had come apart upon entry into the atmosphere of Osgiliath Prime. Above him, the sky was a bruised tapestry of brown smog and chemical clouds, illuminated by the distant rhythmic strobing of the Hive City's lightning conductors. Kaelen tried to move, and a spike of agony drove through his left flank. His ceramite plating was cracked, the auto-senses of his helm dead. He scrambled free of the burning wreckage, his boots crunching on glass and ferrocrete. Around him, the crash site was a crater of devastation in the middle of a vast industrial wasteland, a graveyard of rusted manufactorums and pipelines that stretched to the horizon. There were no survivors. The bodies of his stormtroopers were broken dolls scattered among the debris, their lasguns bent and useless. He was alone. But as his hand went to the pouch at his belt, he felt the heavy, cold, reassuring weight of the object. The lead box had shattered in the impact, but the ring remained. It felt heavier now, as if it had absorbed the gravity of the planet itself. Kaelen moved away from the crash site, seeking cover in the skeletal remains of a collapsed refinery. Osgiliath Prime was a world of ceaseless industry, but this sector was a rust zone, a forgotten scar on the planet's surface where the machinery had long since died. The silence here was oppressive, broken only by the hiss of acidic rain hitting the hot metal of the wreckage. He clutched the ring in his gauntleted fist, refusing to look at it, yet unable to let it go. It whispered to him, not in words, but in impulses. "Wear me," it suggested, a thought that felt like his own. "I can hide you. I can make you a shadow that even the optics of a Titan cannot track." Kaelen gritted his teeth, reciting the litany of protection until his throat was raw. He needed to reach the upper spires of the hive, to contact the local Arbites or the planetary governor. But as he navigated the maze of rusted pipes, he realized he was being hunted. It was not the Nazgûl, not yet. It was something native to this hellscape. The ground trembled rhythmically. Thump, thump, thump. A heavy, wet breathing echoed through the fog, smelling of rotten meat and old blood. The predator emerged from the smog like a nightmare birthed from the genetic memory of the galaxy. It was a feral carnifex, a remnant of a tyrannid splinter fleet that had been repelled centuries ago, leaving behind mindless bio-beasts to prowl the underhives. This one was ancient, its chitin scarred by lasers and rusted metal, one of its scything talons broken off into a jagged stump. It was blind in one eye, but the other burned with a predatory yellow hunger. It sniffed the air, its sensory organs twitching. It smelled the blood leaking from Kaelen's armor. Kaelen raised his bolt pistol, but the weapon clicked empty. He had spent his fury in the warp. He drew Daemonbane, the force sword sputtering with weak energy. The beast roared, a sound that shook the rust from the girders above, and charged. It was a locomotive of muscle and bone, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Kaelen backed away, tripping over a coil of cables. He was trapped against a sheer wall of corrugated iron. The beast raised its remaining talon, ready to cleave him in two. There was no logic in the decision, only desperation. With the massive bio-scythe descending, Kaelen stripped the gauntlet from his left hand and jammed the gold ring onto his finger. The world did not go dark. It exploded into a realm of terrifying clarity. The physical world, the carnifex, the rust, the rain, dissolved into a gray, misty phantom. In its place, the Imperium bled through. The carnifex was no longer a beast of flesh, but a glowing silhouette of dull, hungry, red bioenergy. It struck the spot where Kaelen stood, its talons smashing into the concrete, but Kaelen was no longer there. He was a ghost standing in the threshold between the materium and the immaterium. He watched, breath held, as the beast confusedly thrashed at the empty air, sniffing for a scent that had suddenly vanished. The ring had shifted Kaelen's phase variance. To the carnifex, he simply ceased to exist. A surge of exhilaration shot through the Inquisitor. This was power. This was the tactical advantage the Imperium needed. I can see everything, he thought. I am untouchable. But the cost of the sight was immediate. While the carnifex could not see him, other things could. In this twilight realm, the horizon was dominated not by the hive city, but by a burning, unblinking eye in the distance, a tear in the fabric of reality that looked suspiciously like the cicatrix maledictum, but focused entirely on him. Whispers clawed at his mind, millions of them, screaming his name. Kaelen, they roared in the voice of grinding stones. Shadowy shapes, vast and winged, circled high above in the gray void, drawn to the beacon of the ring like moths to a flame. The ring was not hiding him, it was spotlighting him to the warp. The heat on his finger became unbearable, searing the flesh. With a scream of effort, Kaelen ripped the ring from his finger. The gray world snapped back to reality. The color returned, the sound of rain returned. He was lying in the mud 10 meters from the confused carnifex. The beast, having lost his prey, was lumbering away into the fog. Kaelen lay shivering, clutching his burned hand to his chest. He had escaped the monster, but he had touched the darkness, and he knew with terrified certainty that the darkness had touched him back. High above the toxic cloud layer of Osgiliath Prime, the void was silent no longer. The Pharaoh Mortis, a grand cruiser of the 4th Legion, hung in geostationary orbit like a serrated dagger pressed against the planet's throat. On the bridge, warsmith Malgaroth stood motionless, his Terminator armor a hulking mass of gunmetal gray and hazard-striped yellow, ancient servos hissing with the rhythm of a dying lung. He did not look at the view screen, he looked at the data slate hardwired into his left gauntlet. The signal was unmistakable. It was a frequency of the warp that had not been heard since the burning of Olympia, a harmonic resonance that promised absolute dominion. "The signal is localized," rasped the warpsmith at the tactical console, a creature more cable than flesh. "Sector 7G, the rust zone. It is unshielded." Malgaroth's lip curled in a sneer that might have been a smile on a lesser man. He did not worship the Chaos Gods, he viewed them as fuel. And this artifact? This was a reactor waiting to be plugged into a war machine. "The corpse worshippers do not know what they hold," Malgaroth growled, his voice deep and grinding like millstones. Prepare the drop pods. We do not entreat the dark powers for favors. We take what is ours. Iron within. The sky over the industrial sector tore open. It began as a series of sonic booms that shattered the few remaining windows in the hab blocks, followed by streaks of fire that turned the smog-choked twilight into a hellish dawn. The Iron Warriors did not invade with fanfare. They invaded with mathematical precision. The drop pods slammed into the earth with the force of meteors, crushing the pitiful ferrocrete bunkers of the Planetary Defense Force, PDF, before the hatch bolts even blew. Dust and pulverized rock billowed out in a choking wave. From the craters marched the legionnaires, giants of ceramite and hatred, their bolters raised. They did not scream war cries, they simply began the equation of slaughter. A PDF platoon, hastily assembled and terrified, opened fire with lasguns. The red beams merely scorched the paint of the traitor Astartes. In response, the Iron Warriors unleashed a wall of mass reactive bolts. Bodies exploded in mists of red wetness. There was no glory here, only the cold industrial efficiency of the 4th Legion clearing an obstruction. Malgaroth's personal Dreadclaw pod landed in the center of a magistratum plaza, crushing a statue of an imperial saint beneath its bulk. The ramp slammed down, and the warsmith emerged, flanked by a squad of obliterators, monstrosities where flesh and heavy weaponry had fused into a single biomechanical horror. The air reeked of ozone and cordite. Malgaroth scanned the area, his helmets targeting auspex, painting rune locks on the thermal signatures of fleeing civilians and soldiers alike. He ignored them. They were irrelevant variables. He turned his gaze toward the distant crumbling refinery where the signal pulsed strongest. "Bring up the siege engines," he commanded over the Vox. "I want the sector leveled. Leave nothing standing higher than a kneecap. But the bearer of the signal, he is to be taken alive, or at least his hand is." Behind him, a defiler crab-walked out of the smoke, its battle cannon swiveling to target a hab block that might conceal snipers. The building vanished in a cloud of debris a second later. The PDF commander, a grizzled veteran named Harkon, watched from his command chimera as his world ended. He had fought orcs, he had suppressed cultist uprisings, but this was different. The enemy moved with the discipline of the Adeptus Astartes, but possessed the cruelty of demons. "Hold the line at the bridge," Harkon screamed into the Vox. "For the Emperor! Don't let them cross!" It was a futile gesture. A Vindicator siege tank, clad in the hazard stripes of the Iron Warriors, rolled around the corner. Its massive demolisher cannon roared, and the bridge, along with 2 Lemon Russ tanks and 50 men, simply ceased to exist. The shockwave knocked Harkon's chimera on its side. As he crawled out of the wreckage, coughing blood, he looked up to see a massive shape looming over him. An Iron Warrior, his armor adorned with the flayed skulls of loyalists, looked down. There was no anger in the traitor's lenses, only boredom. The chainsaw revved. Harkon realized with final clarity that they were not fighting a war, they were being deleted. Deep in the rust zone, Malgaroth paused. The signal was moving. It was erratic, terrified. The prey was running. The warsmith felt a flicker of annoyance. He hated running. It was undignified. He activated the teleport homer on his belt, signaling the Ferro Mortis. "Deploy the raptors. Flush him out. Drive him toward the Manufactorum. I will intercept him there." He looked at the ring's energy signature on his slate again. It was spiking, reacting to the violence, feeding on the death surrounding it. The warsmith chuckled, a sound like grinding gears. This ring was a weapon of domination, and who better to wield it than the legion that had been denied its rightful conquest for 10,000 years? He would forge a new empire, not of faith, but of iron. He stepped over the corpse of a PDF trooper, crushing his ribcage without breaking stride. The hunt was on. Illic Nightspear, ranger of Craftworld Aelatok, did not stand upon the rusted gantry. He existed within the negative space of the structure, his chameleoline cloak shifting its psychoplastic weave to mimic the corrosion and shadow perfectly. Through the scope of his Voidbringer long rifle, the world was a spectrum of thermal ghosts and psychic echoes. He had tracked the anomaly, the cursed band, across 3 subsectors. To his people, the Asuyani, it was known as the Isha's Tear, a mythic error from the war in heaven, though these crude humans called it a discovery. Illic watched the human Inquisitor, Kaelen, stumbling through the debris field below. The human was pathetic, bleeding and clumsy, a beacon of psychic noise screaming into the void. But the ring was terrifying. Even from this distance, Illic could hear it singing. It did not sing of war, like the crude orc Wa, nor of excess, like the great enemy. It sang of order, a suffocating absolute tyranny where free will was ground to dust beneath an iron heel. It was the antithesis of the Eldari soul. "They come," Illic whispered, the words lost in the wind. His acute hearing picked up the screech of jump packs long before the human did. Kaelen had backed himself into a cul-de-sac of crumbling ferrocrete, his bolt pistol raised with trembling hands. 3 raptors of the Iron Warriors descended from the smog, their jump packs flaring with dirty orange ion trails. They landed with earth-shaking weight, their chainswords idling with a hungry growl. "Give us the iron," the lead raptor croaked, his voice box replaced by a vox grill, "and we will grant you a quick death." Kaelen prepared to die, but before the Chaos Marine could take a step, his head snapped back violently. A single crystalline shard, accelerated to hypersonic speeds, punched through the ocular lens of his helmet, exiting the back of his skull in a spray of brain matter and ceramite. The raptor collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. The other 2 spun around, confused, searching for a muzzle flash that didn't exist. Crack! Another shot, impossibly precise, found the neck joint of the second traitor, severing the spinal column. The third raptor roared, igniting his jump pack to ascend, but a third shot shattered his fuel intake. He exploded in a fireball of promethium and shrapnel. Silence returned to the alley, save for the crackling of burning meat. Kaelen scanned the rooftops, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Show yourself!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "I am an agent of the Holy Ordo Malleus!" A shimmer in the air 10 meters in front of him solidified into a tall, slender figure. Illic Nightspear did not walk, he flowed, his movement too fluid for a human eye to track comfortably. He held his long rifle loosely, but the threat was implicit. "Lower your weapon, Mon-Ki," the ranger said, his low Gothic accented with the musical, arrogant cadence of the Eldari. "If I wished you dead, you would be a cooling corpse already." Kaelen hesitated, then lowered the pistol. He knew of the Eldar, treacherous, alien, but occasionally useful. "Why?" Kaelen asked. "Why save me?" Illic's helmet eyes glowed a faint, soulless blue. "Because that trinket you carry burns with a light that draws the moths of the warp. If the Iron Warriors take it, they will not just destroy this world, they will breach the webway. I do not save you for your sake, human. I save you because you are the mule that carries the burden away from my people." The truce was forged in necessity and tempered by mutual loathing. They moved into the underhive, descending into the bowels of the city where the light of the sun had never touched.
Illic took point, his senses alerting them to patrols long before they were visible. But the deeper they went, the more the environment changed. The ring's influence was permeating the local population of mutants and dregs. Shadows stretched unnaturally long. The rats scuttling in the pipes chattered in tongues that sounded like broken High Gothic. They were ambushed in a drainage tunnel by a gang of scavies, but these were not ordinary wretches. Their eyes were sewn shut with gold wire, and they wielded clubs made of human femurs. "Do not let them touch you," Illic warned, drawing a shuriken pistol. The fight was a blur of motion. Illic moved like a dancer, his shuriken discs slicing through limbs and throats with surgical precision, while Kaelen used the butt of his pistol and his combat knife, fighting with the brutal desperation of a cornered animal. The scavies did not cry out in pain. They laughed, giggling about the precious as they died. They rested in a sealed pump station, the air thick with humidity. Kaelen slumped against a wall, exhaustion graying his face. He held the ring in his hand, staring at it. Illic stood watch, his back to the human, but his mind was under siege. Being this close to the artifact was a torture the Ranger had not anticipated. The ring did not whisper to him of power or conquest. That was too simple for an Eldar mind. It whispered of restoration. "Illic," the voice purred inside his spirit stone, "the fall can be undone. The crone worlds can be cleansed. I can bind Slaanesh. I can seal the great enemy away forever. All you need is the will to use me." Illic's hand tightened on his rifle until the wraithbone stock creaked. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie, but it was a lie so beautiful it made his soul ache. He turned, looking at the exhausted human. It would be so easy. A single shot, take the ring, save his race. The blue lenses of his helmet flared. Kaelen looked up, seeing the alien staring at him, and for a moment the Inquisitor saw not a savior, but a predator considering its meal. "We must keep moving," Illic said abruptly, his voice strained, forcing the desire back into the cage of his discipline. "The shadows are deepening."
Tank Commander Harkin of the Cadian 112th Armored swallowed a mouthful of recaf that tasted of engine grease and fear. He sat in the cupola of the Emperor's Fury, a Lehman Russ demolisher that smelled of sweat, ozone, and the recycled flatulence of his crew. Outside the 3-inch plasteel hull, the world was ending. The hive city of Osgiliath Prime had ceased to be a place of habitation and had become a meat grinder. The sound was not a continuous roar, but a rhythmic, earth-shattering percussion, the thud-thud-thud of basilisk artillery batteries firing from the rear lines, answered by the screaming descent of Iron Warrior's siege shells. It sounded like drums, massive subterranean drums beating a rhythm of annihilation deep within the crust of the planet. Harkin peered through his periscope, the green-tinted visuals shaking with every impact. "Driver, forward!" he barked into the VoxNet. "Hold the line at the West Bridge. If they cross the river, the hive spire falls." The tank lurched, its tracks grinding over a slurry that was equal parts mud, ferrocrete, and the crushed remains of the PDF infantry who hadn't moved fast enough. The Iron Warriors did not fight like the frenzied berserkers of the World Eaters. They fought with the cold calculation of a demolition crew. They had dug trenches overnight, jagged scars in the earth reinforced with razor wire and skulls. From these pits they poured a withering hail of heavy bolter fire that turned the air into a storm of explosive mass-reactive death. But it was the psychological warfare that gnawed at Harkin's sanity. The enemy voxcasters were broadcasting a low-frequency hum, a sound that vibrated in the teeth and the marrow. It wasn't static, it was a chant in a language that made the tank's machine spirit restless. The Fury's engines sputtered and coughed, requiring Harkin to recite the litany of ignition 3 times just to keep the reactor critical. "They are coming," whispered his gunner,
barely audible over the internal comms. "Look at the fog, Commander. The shadows. They have teeth." As the Fury crested the debris pile overlooking the bridge, the influence of the ring, now moving somewhere deep in the underhive, rippled through the psyche of the Imperial Guard. Harkin looked through the targeter and blinked. The advancing shapes in the smoke did not look like Chaos Space Marines. For a terrifying second, his mind superimposed a nightmare from the racial memory of the galaxy. He saw green skin, he saw crude chappas, he saw orcs. "Greenskins!" he screamed, panic overriding his training. "Orcs at 12 o'clock! Fire! Fire!" The demolisher cannon roared, spitting a massive high-explosive shell. It impacted the center of the bridge, vaporizing a squad of traitor Astartes. But the confusion was spreading. Beside him, a Chimera transport opened fire on its own infantry support, the gunner screaming that they were goblins. The ring was fracturing their perception of reality, turning ally into enemy, soldier into monster. The Voxnet devolved into a cacophony of madness and friendly fire reports. Then the blood rain began. It didn't fall from the clouds, it materialized from the air itself, hot and viscous, coating the vision blocks of the tank in red slime. The boundary between the materium and the warp thinned to the consistency of wet tissue paper. Reality tore open along the Iron Warriors' trench line. They were not summoning reinforcements, they were opening the gates of hell. Blood letters of Khorne poured forth, their red skin glistening, their hell blades burning with black fire. They leaped over the sandbags, moving faster than the eye could follow. Harkin watched in horror as a daemon decapitated a sentinel walker with a single swing of his sword. The screams of the dying were drowned out by the demonic roar, a sound that was the physical manifestation of violence. "Load canister shot," Harkin bellowed, his voice raw. "Scrape them off the hull! Drive! Just drive!" The tank surged forward, its tracks churning through the bodies of daemons and men alike, a steel beast thrashing in a sea of red. The climax came at the center of the bridge. A defiler, a massive crab-like daemon engine of brass and hate clambered over the wreckage of the toll gates. It towered over the Leman Russ, its battle cannon leveling directly at Harkin's face. Time seemed to slow. Harkin could see the corrupt script etched on the defiler's armor, could smell the sulfur of its breath. There was no way out, no retreat. "Target the bridge supports," Harkin ordered, a final act of spite. "Bring it down! You shall not pass!" The gunner slammed the firing rune. The demolisher cannon fired point blank into the Pharaoh Creek pylons beneath the defiler's feet. The explosion was blinding. The bridge groaned, a sound like a dying god, and then collapsed. The Fury, the Defiler, and 100 screaming combatants plummeted into the toxic sludge of the river below. The drums stopped, replaced by the silence of the grave, only to be broken moments later by the distant, mocking laughter of the warp. The line had broken. The siege of Osgiliath Prime was lost. The artifact did not think in words. It thought in hunger. To the golden band resting against the ceramite glove of Inquisitor Kaelen, the universe was a tapestry of souls, some bright and burning like stars, others dull and gray like ash. It tasted the fear of the man carrying it, a vintage of terror, aged by duty and desperate faith. But the ring was bored of this carrier. It was a creature of domination, and it sought a hand capable of crushing worlds, not saving them. As Kaelen stumbled onto the upper observation deck of the Hive Spire, the ring flexed its metaphysical will. It did not just emit radiation, it emitted a broadcast of pure, unadulterated command. It reached out through the thinning veil of reality, bypassing the petty prayers of the ecclesiarchy and the crude binary of the Mechanicus. It found the tear in the sky that the slaughter of the bridge had opened, and it pulled. The gold heated to white-hot intensity, searing the leather of Kaelen's glove, fusing the material to his flesh. The Inquisitor screamed, but he could not drop it. The ring was no longer an object, it was an anchor, and the chain was being reeled in from the other side of hell. The sky above Osgiliath Prime bruised purple, the clouds swirling into a funnel of impossible geometry. The sounds of the battlefield, the bolter fire, the artillery, the screams were suddenly silenced, sucked into the vacuum of the ascending moment. In the center of the storm, the great rift pulsed, widening like a dilated pupil. From this wound in the materium, a structure began to descend. Not a ship, but a manifestation of psychic architecture. It was a tower of black iron and solidified shadow, crowned with a burning, unblinking eye of red witchfire. This was the Barad-dûr, translated into the language of the warp. The sheer weight of its presence cracked the tectonic plates of the planet. The ground heaved, swallowing tanks whole. Gravity distorted, causing debris to float upward into the maw of the storm. The air became so thick with warp spores that to breathe was to invite madness. Every psyker on the planet, loyalist or heretic, simultaneously convulsed and died, their minds burned out by the arrival of a presence too vast to be contained within a mortal skull. He stepped from the shadows of the spectral tower, manifesting directly onto the spire platform where Kaelen stood. He was not a biological entity, nor was he merely a daemon. He was a Daemon Prince of Chaos Undivided, an ancient warlord who had ascended before the Horus Heresy, a contemporary of the anathema who had chosen a darker path. He stood 12 feet tall, encased in armor that seemed to be forged from the event horizon of a black hole, plate so dark it drank the light of the fires burning below. In his gauntleted hand he dragged a massive mace, Worldbreaker, its head wreathed in black flames. He had no face, only a helm of jagged iron spikes that formed a crown, and within the darkness of the visor, 2 points of yellow malice burned. This was the enemy. This was the Lord of Gifts. This was the Dark Lord reborn in the 41st millennium. He did not roar, he simply existed, and his existence was an affront to the laws of physics. The Iron Warriors who had breached the spire stopped their advance. Even Malgaroth, the Warsmith, fell to one knee, his logic engines overwhelmed by the hierarchy of power. The Daemon Prince did not acknowledge his worshippers. He raised his mace, and a shockwave of kinetic force blasted outward. A hovering Valkyrie gunship, attempting a strafing run, was crumpled like a tin can by an invisible hand and swatted out of the sky. The prince took a step toward Kaelen, the adamantium of the deck groaning under his weight. With every step, the ring on Kaelen's finger burned hotter, vibrating so violently it threatened to shatter the Inquisitor's bones. "You have something of mine," the voice spoke. It was not sound, it was a telepathic intrusion that felt like rusted nails being driven into the frontal lobe. "Builder, destroyer, slave." The prince swung his mace in a lazy arc, and a dozen Imperial stormtroopers who had rushed to Kaelen's aid were vaporized, their bodies unmade into their constituent atoms, leaving only their shadows burned onto the walls. Kaelen fell to his knees, his will shattered. The psychic pressure was a physical weight, pressing him into the floor. He looked up at the towering monstrosity, the embodiment of inevitable defeat. The ring dragged his hand up, offering itself to its master. The Daemon Prince reached down, a gauntlet the size of a human torso, extending to reclaim the prize. Kaelen tried to recite a litany, but his tongue was numb. He was an insect before a god. But then a flicker of movement. High above, perched on a gargoyle, Illic Nightspear leveled his rifle. The ranger was weeping blood from his eyes, his soul stone cracking under the pressure, but he held the aim. "Not today, abomination," Illic whispered. He didn't shoot the prince, he shot the ground at Kaelen's feet, detonating a melta-charge he had planted earlier. The floor disintegrated. Kaelen fell into the darkness of the spire's interior, tumbling away from the grasp of the Dark Lord. The Daemon Prince roared, a sound that shattered every pane of glass in the Hive City, and the chase began. The earth of Osgiliath Prime did not merely shake, it convulsed, groaning under a weight that the planet's crust was never designed to bear. High above the burning hab spires, the smoke was parted by a sound that bypassed the ear and resonated directly in the soul, the war horn. It was a braying, mechanical challenge, a declaration of godhood broadcast at 100 decibels. Princeps Hecate, suspended in the amniotic gel of the command throne within the head of the Warlord Titan Ignis Diorum, felt the vibration in her teeth. She was no longer a woman of flesh and bone. Through the mind impulse unit, she was the Titan. She felt the fusion reactor beating as her heart, the void shields humming as her skin, and the Sun Fury Plasma Annihilator itching on her right arm. "Engine kill detected," her Moderati reported, voice trembling. "Traitor engine, class Reaver, designation Hate's Messenger." Hecate focused her manifold sight. Through the smoke, a towering shape of rusted iron and weeping sores emerged, its carapace adorned with flayed bodies. It raised a turbo-laser destructor. "Walk," Hecate commanded, and the god machine took a step, crushing a city block into dust. "For the Omnisia, for the Emperor, purge!" The engagement was a clash of meteorological proportions. The Hate's Messenger fired first, twin beams of red laser energy slamming into the Ignis Diorum's void shields. The air shimmered and cracked, turning into a kaleidoscope of bruised colors as the shields absorbed the energy of a small star. Hecate gritted her teeth, feeling the phantom pain of the impact as a migraine behind her eyes. "Return fire," she whispered. The Warlord Titan halted, its massive stabilizers locking into the bedrock. The plasma annihilator on its arm whined, a sound like a dying sun, before unleashing a torrent of blue-white fury. The shot struck the traitor Titan's center mass. There was no resistance. The Reaver's void shields popped with the sound of a thunderclap, and the superheated plasma bored through ceramite, adamantium, and corrupted flesh. The enemy engine staggered, its chaotic war horn bleeding in agony as its reactor went critical. A second later, the Reaver disappeared inside a mushroom cloud of nuclear fire, its upper torso vaporized. "Target destroyed," the Moderati cheered, but the celebration was cut short by a scream from the sensor pit. "Princeps, Auspex anomaly, directly below us. It's too small to be a Titan, but the energy signature is thrown. It's off the scale." Hecate looked down through the Titan's sensors. Standing amidst the rubble, untouched by the nuclear fire, was the Demon Prince. The Dark Lord looked up at the Warlord Titan, a gnat facing a mountain, and raised his mace. He did not strike the Titan physically, he struck its spirit. A wave of black warp sorcery erupted from the mace, slamming into the Ignis Diorum. Hecate screamed as the manifold turned into a nightmare. The machine spirit of the Titan, usually a loyal and bellicose beast, recoiled in terror. The void shields did not fail, they simply dissolved, eaten by the entropy of the ring-bearer. The Demon Prince grew in stature, his form swelling with borrowed power until he stood eye-level with the Titan's knee. He swung Worldbreaker, and the Titan's shin armor, thick enough to stop a macro-cannon shell, shattered like glass. Inquisitor Kaelen, scrambling through the sewers beneath the battlefield, felt the impact as an earthquake. He emerged from a drainage pipe just in time to witness the death of a god. The Ignis Diorum was listing heavily, its right leg severed at the knee. The massive machine teetered, fighting gravity, its gyros whining in protest. The Demon Prince stood beneath it, laughing, a sound that drowned out the explosions. Kaelen looked at the ring on his hand. It was vibrating so hard it blurred his vision. It wanted to go to him. It wanted to return to the Master. "He is inevitable," the ring whispered. "The age of men is over. The age of Orc. No, the time of chaos has come." "No," Kaelen spat, blood drooling from his lip. He saw the Eldar ranger Illic materializing from the shadows nearby. The alien looked pale, his spirit stone cracked. "The Titan falls," the Eldar said, his voice void of emotion. "We must use the distraction, the rift. We must get to the rift." With a final mournful blast of its war horn, the Ignis Diorum toppled. The impact seemed to take an eternity. Thousands of tons of divine machinery crashed into the Hive City, flattening an entire district. The impact threw Kaelen and Illic off their feet. But the Titan was not done. Princeps Hecate, dying in her amniotic tank, initiated the final protocol: castigation of the machine. She overloaded the plasma reactor. The wreckage of the Titan turned white, then blinded the world. The explosion was absolute. It should have vaporized everything within 3 kilometers. But as the light faded and the dust settled, Kaelen saw a sight that chilled his soul. The crater was vast, glowing with molten rock, but in the center, walking through the fires of the reactor breach as if it were a spring breeze, came the Demon Prince. His armor was glowing red from the heat, but he was unharmed. The ring had protected him. He raised his mace, pointing it directly at Kaelen. The endgame had arrived. The ascent to the tear in the sky was not a climb. It was a surrender to gravity's demise. The destruction of the Titan's reactor had destabilized the local physics of the Hive Spire, creating a floating archipelago of Ferrocrete islands drifting upward into the maw of the Warp Rift. Inquisitor Kaelen scrambled across a floating slab of masonry, his breath coming in ragged, bloody gasps. Beside him, Illic Nightspear moved like a shadow, though the Eldar's armor was cracked and his movement sluggish. They were not running away from death, they were running into it. The rift above was a swirling vortex of madness, a cataract eye staring blindly into the soul of the Imperium. The heat radiating from it was not thermal, it was the friction of reality grinding against unreality. And in Kaelen's hand, the ring was screaming. It was no longer a whisper, it was a roar of command that vibrated through his skeletal structure, demanding obedience. "I see you," it thundered, using Kaelen's own voice against him. "I see the golden throne. I see the rot. I can fix it. I can save him. Do not throw me away, you fool. I am the mercy of the Emperor." They reached the edge of the precipice, a jagged spur of the spire that protruded directly into the event horizon of the rift. Below them, the Daemon Prince ascended, stepping on floating debris, rising like inevitable entropy. The entity was laughing, a sound that cracked the purity seals on Kaelen's armor. Kaelen looked into the swirling madness of the warp. He held his hand out over the void. All he had to do was open his fingers, just let go. But his hand refused, the muscles locked, rigid as iron. The ring had hijacked his nervous system. Tears of frustration and holy rage streamed down Kaelen's face. He wanted to destroy it, but the ring showed him a vision. Kaelen, Lord Inquisitor of Terra, seated at the right hand of the Emperor, the galaxy purged of Xenos, the warp calmed forever. It was the perfect lie. I cannot," Kaelen choked out, the words tasting of bile. "It is necessary." He pulled his hand back to his chest, cradling the gold. "It is mine." "Then you are lost," Illic Nightspear whispered. The Eldar raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the Daemon Prince crested the ledge. The Dark Lord did not use a weapon, he used his will. He swatted Illic aside with a gesture, sending the ranger tumbling into the debris field. The prince turned his eyeless gaze upon Kaelen. "Return what is mine," the entity commanded, extending a gauntlet that dripped with the blood of stars. Kaelen, entranced, stepped forward. He held out the ring, offering it to the master. The prince's fingers, talons of black ether, brushed Kaelen's palm. The connection was electric. Kaelen felt his soul being flayed from his body. But in that moment of absolute violation, the Inquisitor found a shard of clarity, a singular, hateful nugget of human defiance. He could not open his hand. He could not throw the ring. But he could destroy the vessel holding it. With a scream that tore his vocal cords, Kaelen whipped his combat knife from his belt and brought it down in a savage arc, not on the prince, but on his own left hand. The blade sheared through bone and sinew. There was no pain, only a sudden, icy shock. The severed finger, still wearing the glowing band of gold, spun away into the void. The connection snapped. The Daemon Prince let out a shriek that was not of this world, a sound of pure, bewildered negation. The ring, separated from its carrier and falling into the raw stuff of the warp, flared with a blinding, apocalyptic light. It did not want to go back. It thought the gravity of the rift, but the Imperium was hungry. As the ring vanished into the purple swirl, the anchor holding the Daemon Prince to the materium shattered. The entity began to unravel. Armor turned to smoke, flesh turned to ash. "Curse you, manling!" the prince roared as the vacuum of the closing rift caught him. He clawed at the spire, tearing furrows in the adamantium, but the suction was absolute. With a final thunderclap that flattened the ruins of the hive, the rift collapsed in on itself, dragging the prince, the ring, and the dark tower back into the hell from which they came. Silence fell over Osgiliath Prime. It was the silence of a tomb. Kaelen lay on the edge of the ruin, clutching the bloody stump of his hand, staring up at a sky that was slowly turning from bruised purple to a dull, smoggy gray. The wind howled, empty and cold. He was alive. He had won. But as the adrenaline faded, the crushing weight of the grim, dark reality settled in. He heard the roar of engines, Imperial Valkyries, painted in the black and silver of the Grey Kings. They were not coming to give him a medal. He had touched the anathema. He had carried a device of the archenemy. He had seen things that no mortal mind was permitted to retain. Illic was gone, vanished into the webway, leaving Kaelen alone to face the Emperor's justice. Kaelen closed his eyes, listening to the heavy boots of the Terminators hitting the deck. The ring is gone, he thought, a final tear tracking through the soot on his face. But in the grim darkness of the far future, nothing stays buried forever.